Hello everybody, this is just an introduction to Franz Josef Land and Novaya Zemlya, which are two locations that we will have trips to this summer, and I think you would really enjoy visiting them. We'll be using this ship, the Litsen. It's the sister ship to the Klebnikov, which you're probably more familiar with. And it is a powerful icebreaker. It's the only ship that can really go safely everywhere it wants in Franz Josef Land. The trips actually start in St. Petersburg. From there you will fly to Murmansk, and from there you take the ship all the way to Franz Josef Land. It's 24,000 horsepower, so it's a very powerful icebreaker. It has all the facilities you'd expect, a dining room which can carry everybody, and a lecture room which also has seating for everybody on board. We will have 4 key members of staff who will be the lecturers, who will introduce people to the birds, the ornithologists that we'll see along the way. We have a biologist who will cover the mammals, of course the 2 big icons of the north, the walrus and the polar bear, and a geologist who will talk about the very unusual rock formations we see there. And in addition to that, we'll be operating in ice, so our geologist will talk about ice and glaciation, and as well as interpreting the actual formations that we'll be seeing along the way. Our historian, obviously, we'll be talking about the history of exploration. These islands never did have Aboriginal peoples, so the history is all very recent. And it's the history of the story of the people who discovered these islands and then travelled amongst them. Because we are operating in ice quite a lot of the time, we can't use Zodiacs, so we use helicopters. These are Russian helicopters. They carry 7 people at a time, and if we are in ice, then we can use them for landings as well as for sightseeing. If possible, we will use Zodiacs, and in many locations there is enough open water to be able to do that. People have to be reasonably agile. You don't have to be super fit, but you do need to be able to negotiate quite a long gangway. This is what it looks like from the top. It's quite steep, but it's got a very good surface, so it doesn't get too slippery. When we go ashore, we carry firearms. There is always the danger of an unfriendly person coming around the corner, which is a polar bear. We're very, very cautious about polar bears, not just in terms of the protection of people, but also we don't want to put the polar bear in a situation where we may have to shoot the animal. And then on our longer trip, after Franz Josef Land, we also visit Novaya Zemlya. So this is Franz Josef Land, the last big archipelago to be discovered in the world, still one of the most remote locations any tourist can go to. In addition to that, the longer trips. You'll have to edit this. From Murmansk, we also have to cross the Barents Sea. It can be quite rough, but not always. But once we reach the islands, then it's always going to be calm because we're in narrow channels between the islands, and also there's often quite a lot of ice around, so there's no opportunity for the winds to create large waves. Quickly to mention some highlights of the places we may land at, and there's no guarantee of any of these locations. One is Cape Flora. You see the big cliffs behind, and then a lot of greenery, because those cliffs are the home to many, many thousands of birds, and over the centuries their droppings have created a very fertile area for growth. If you look up, you can see the sky filled with them. These are mainly little auks, or some people call them dovekies. Cape Flora itself has a rich history in terms of exploration, as well as a lot of good vegetation and lots of little flowers. Everywhere in Franz Josef Land you will find some vegetation and flowers, although it is, of course, a cold desert. So you have to look carefully to find the wildlife and also the flowers and the lichens. At Cape Flora, you will find monuments to various expeditions that have spent time there. One of the locations we may visit is Roubini Rock. It's a big basaltic rock, and unlike many basaltic areas where the pillars are vertical, this has become contorted and many of the layers are horizontal, which gives ideal nesting places for thousands and thousands of birds. This is one of the biggest bird colonies, not only in Franz Josef Land, but in the world. Mainly guillemots. You have a variety of gulls, such as the glaucous gull and kittiwakes. There may be the chance to visit an abandoned scientific station, abandoned in 1959, but still the buildings there exist. Wonderful opportunities for photographs. Another location we may visit is the location where Nansen spent the winter after his attempt to reach the North Pole. They struggled back to land, and they ended up having to spend the winter here at Cape Norway. They found a piece of wood there, just a piece of driftwood. They put walrus skins over the top of it, built a little wall, and they managed to survive the winter. The log is still there, and the remains of the hut scattered around it. We also expect to see walrus throughout our journey in Franz Josef Land, and of course polar bears. These are all photographs taken just last year in Franz Josef Land. I mentioned that we have a geologist on board. One of the places we might visit is Champ Island, and it has this huge round boulder there. Another place that we may visit is Cape Tegethoff, and this is where the history all began, because the people who first discovered Franz Josef Land called this Cape Tegethoff after their ship, which was the Admiral Tegethoff. They spent the winter here after drifting in the ice for over a year, and their ship eventually was not able to be repaired. It was not going to escape the ice, and they made an amazing journey by small boat to end up in Novaya Zemlya. We see them here as they pack their boats and their sleds ready to head south to try and escape for their lives. It's one of those journeys which matches, if not exceeds, the famous journeys of Shackleton and people of such nature. And finally, we have a couple of landings on Novaya Zemlya, both at the north end. One of them is in the Orange Islands, which were first visited by Barents, from which we get the name the Barents Sea. And there are walrus, and also there are big high likelihood of finding polar bears there as well. And our second landing on Novaya Zemlya is at Inostrancev Bay. You can see from, if you look at an image from Google Earth, you can see the ice cap and the ice extending right out into the bay. So there's a chance there of seeing the glacial wall. And from there, it's back to Murmansk. So that's it, Franz Josef Land and Novaya Zemlya, two of the most remote and unusual locations in the world.